Hi, I'm Sebastian. I'm the projectionist here at Trinity Art Centre in Tunbridge, Wales. I've been a projectionist since 1974, which is when I started at the cinema over the road, the old ABC as was, although it was a classic when I joined. Went through several name changes. Trained on 3 different types of projector because they had 3 cinemas, each one with a different setup and system. And then later they brought in different systems again to that, and then coming here there's a different system. And I've also worked at Sevenoaks at the Stag, where they've got yet another system, and also at the Mayfield Cinema Club, where they've got, hey, another system. But all those systems have one thing in common, which is that it's 35mm film, which is basically this. Film, when it arrives, has what we call leaders and tails, which is a piece of blank film, basically, which is to protect it during transit. This lot has quite a lot. As you can see, it's quite easy to manipulate, but it does curl somewhat better. And each film comes in, within the boxes they come in reels like that, which is, average film is about 6 parts these days. This is about 20 minutes of film. Now most films are 5 or 6 parts in length, and then they're joined up into one big roll to be shown in most places. And that means that you have to remember where you've made the joins between the parts. So that's about a foot away from the join. Get a nice bit of address label, sticky white paper, and just fold it over the edge where it hopefully won't interfere with the soundtrack or the picture. As you can see, that's the film. It's a CinemaScope film, which is why the image looks a bit squashed. That bit there, those lines there, are the soundtrack. It's encoded in some mysterious and possibly magical way into these lines, and then there's a cell on the projector that projects a light through that onto a photoelectric cell, or it used to be. It's now all sort of Dolbyized and digitalized. And that then converts into sound signal, which then comes out of the speakers as speech and cars crashing and explosions and whatever. But that's what your main soundtrack is. And in later years they started adding things, so some systems have an extra stripe down the edge there, making it rather full of sound and not that much picture. Others have stripes down there or there, depending on which system you're using. Still others have the soundtrack printed on each bit between the sprocket holes. So it can get quite crowded, but normally most projectors have only 1 or 2 systems of reading, so that you don't get like cross chatter. In the old days they used to use silver tape, but then they started using the same metallic silver tape to trigger automation systems, so it would confuse the machinery if you kept those in. So paper is nice and neutral, and you have to rub it down because otherwise it can come loose, and then and that's basically just marked there, and then it shows on the actual film I can show you on here. If you look there, that's how it shows up, just there. So I know that that is where that part changes over onto that part. They used to do that as a strange way of repairing damage to the edge. If there was like just a cut in the edge, which can happen, projectionists would do that thing which they call a V-cut, which basically kept you going for that one show, because it just, for some reason, projectors didn't think, oh, there's a cut, I shall rip it. It just went through. However, when you get to things like polyester film, the film doesn't officially break as such, but if it jams hard enough, it can rip all the sprockets apart, like so. And then the wonderful thing you have called a burnout, which is basically, because the film is held in the gate in one position, it melts, basically. It looks spectacular on screen.
It must do. With
usherettes coming in screaming, oh, the screen's on fire! But it's all happening in the projection box instead, and it's basically just that. I mean, after all, basically it is a form of plastic, so you know what melted plastic's like. That's what happens. They used to have, it used to be all film soundtracks were, well, originally they were all silent, but then they were mono, and then they had something called 4-track magnetic, which was, if you look there, you see there's sort of stripes of orange colour, and those are soundtrack parts. This one's actually called mag optical because it's got the optical soundtrack as well as the magnetic, which means that you could run it in a normal projector and it would pick up the optical soundtrack, but if you had the proper equipment you could also run it as magnetic, and that would give you surround sound, which most places didn't have in the early days. They only had speakers behind the screen, that was it. And then they went one better and had 70mm, which is 6 tracks of sound. And the beauty of 70 is that because it's that much bigger than 35, as you can see, just double the size, it's a huge improvement on the picture. We had, we showed Amadeus in 70mm at the cinema, and it was beautiful, pin sharp, bright, clear.
Then don't they use it now
then we had, for the third week of it, we showed the same film but in 35mm, and it was like, why has it gone so dark? Where's my colour gone? It's really, really spectacular.
Is it more expensive?
70mm, yes. Yes, there was, I think it was something like £5,000 to £8,000 for a print. So if you damaged that, you were in deep trouble. Polyester film. Most films nowadays are polyester because it's a lot safer. In the old days, luckily before I started, they had something called nitrate film, which was lethal. Basically, you only had to look at it funny and it burst into flame as bright as phosphorus. You could get blinded, you could get burned to death. And that's why a lot of the old cinemas have got asbestos in them, because it's the best fire retardant they had in those days. And because film was so dangerous, they had to have as much fire retardant stuff in the place. And always, even before the current legislation, which is health related, they had no smoking because you don't have any naked flame anywhere near.
Imagine what would happen.
Certain chemicals weren't allowed to be used. I must say I find it ironic that talking about the last days of 35mm onto a digital camera, but these things happen.